Hello and welcome to East Carolina University's campus. We are here for the special edition of Pirate Parents Live. My name is Chris Stansbury. I'm the Associate Vice Chancellor for the Division of Student Affairs. And we're here to talk to you and answer some of your questions related to Hurricane Irma. We're going to talk about the possible impacts, albeit they're getting smaller by the day for Eastern North Carolina and for ECU. And then we're going to take some of your questions. Some of us here have gotten a lot of emails and phone calls and social media posts, and we want to try and answer as many of those as we can. Keep in mind, we will not be able to get to every single post, but we will try and do as best we can. If you're watching us live, it's Friday, September 8th. We're starting this at 1 o'clock. So feel free to put your comments in the comment section, ask your questions, and we will ask them to the panel here in just a few moments. And then we'll get as many of these answered as we can. If you're watching the archived edition, feel free to go through, learn the information. Hopefully it's helpful to you. If you have additional questions, we are, of course, not going anywhere. We'll be here to take your calls, your emails, and social media posts as we go forward. If you're watching the archived edition, your best way for the latest information would be to visit the ECU homepage where there is consistent, regular updates. That's ecu.edu, or you can go to ecu.edu/alert for that information. So we've seen a lot in the last couple of weeks that have impacted our entire country weather-wise. Hurricane Harvey has just barely moved on, and we're looking at Irma and Jose and Katia, and they're all kind of stacking up, and we've still got a couple of more weeks left in the hurricane season in 2017. So we've got some administrators and leaders here from East Carolina. We're going to take your questions and calls, or at least your questions and your posts rather, and we're going to go through them as much as possible. So let me introduce who we have here today. Starting at the far end, we have Janine Hudson. She's with News Services for East Carolina University and University Communications. To her right is Lauren Mink. Lauren's with Environmental Health and Safety. We go to Lauren for every time we have a crisis. Lauren's the one that we turn to for our information. That's why we have her here to answer your questions. To her right is Lynn Roeder. Dr. Roeder is the Dean of Students. And on the far end, definitely last but not least, is Bill McCartney. He's the Associate Vice Chancellor for Campus Living, which also includes dining and transit. So we're going to start with just a quick update. For those watching live, Lauren, give us a little bit of a snapshot of where we are on Hurricane Irma. We know it's heading to the Florida coast, but as far as Eastern North Carolina, what do you think we can expect and when?
Sure. So as of the 11 o'clock update from the National Hurricane Center, you may have noticed that the forecast track is shifted further to the west after hitting the coast of Florida. Eastern North Carolina is no longer in the cone. Again, the cone is a area that the eye of the storm might cross over, not necessarily an impact cone. Right now, Irma is about 500 miles wide from one side to the other, and the state of North Carolina is approximately 400 miles wide. So we will definitely feel some impacts as Irma makes its way up towards Tennessee. We are expecting that the models have kept Irma continuing to go west, so we anticipate that those models are going to continue to track Irma west. For Eastern North Carolina, we can expect some higher wind speeds on Monday morning, probably around 8 a.m. throughout the day Monday. Winds sustained about 20 miles an hour, and gusts possibly up to 30 miles an hour. Rain has kind of tampered off a little bit with this western shift, so we're looking at 1 to 2 inches of rainfall. Pitt County is actually 8 inches of rainfall over what we normally receive by this time of the year, so we are a bit saturated from recent storms that we've had. So if we get the 1 to 2 inches at a very quick pace, we could see some flash flooding in flood-prone areas. So we are taking some steps for those flood-prone areas to block those off so that we don't have anyone driving through flooded roadways. With the saturated grounds and winds up to 20, 30 miles an hour, we could see some weak tree limbs or small trees fall. So you might see an isolated power outage. So again, that's something to be aware of. But that's what we're expecting for Eastern North Carolina, minimal impacts at this point. We do see that the models are becoming more confident in staying to our west, going into Tennessee. So our friends in Western North Carolina are now worried about the major impacts. But right now, Eastern North Carolina should be looking good right now. It is very important. There is a lot of time between now and Monday that things could change, so it's important that we remain vigilant and prepared. So we've got teams on campus that are prepared, and we encourage you and your students to also take preparations at this time while we still have time to prepare before Monday.
So Lauren, if you could, the university is connected with a lot of entities outside National Weather Service and so forth. Talk about some of the folks that you're regularly connected with and how often you get those updates.
Sure. So we are directly connected with the National Weather Service. We are a storm-ready university, And what that means is that we have hazardous weather response plans, we communicate with the National Weather Service and have a direct line to them. So we communicate with them at least twice a day, but we have access to them anytime we want. We get updates from the National Hurricane Center at 5 a.m., 11 a.m., 5 p.m., and 11 p.m. So we're in contact with the National Hurricane Center. We've been working with city and county officials as far as what the city and county plans to do, any sheltering operations that they may have planned for. We're also working with the UNC system. The UNC system has 17 institutions, and we're working to make coordinated responses with those institutions so that the system is unified in making decisions, and that we can also help our sister institutions out should the western parts of North Carolina be impacted. And last but not least, we work very closely with North Carolina Emergency Management. They're a great partner to have and have opened up their resources with that state of emergency declaration from Governor Cooper. That all that means is that resources are opened up and ready to be staged across the state, so that we aren't waiting for the impacts to hit us, that we can stage them before the impacts hit us.
So for those of you that are joining live, feel free to put your comments and questions in the comment section on Facebook, and we got folks that are monitoring, and we'll throw those questions to us and we'll throw them to the panel. Janine, I'm coming your way with this one. One of the challenges for a university, especially communications, which is your strength, when these storms are so far away, everybody seems to want information immediately, but we don't always know it. You guys have a plan in place to kind of deal with these types of things, right?
Right, so the university gathers sort of the emergency response weather team, and we start looking out, like 5 days out, what should we be doing on campus to get ready. Facilities starts their checklist, and then we'll also start sending messages to campus, usually just by email, and then we have the ECU alert system, which is really 7 ways we can communicate to campus, not just a text message. But we will start with emails. We did that on Wednesday. Then yesterday we sent another one, added it to the homepage to kind of make sure students were paying attention. It's a red bar on the homepage. You cannot miss it. And so that goes to the alert page where people can read detailed information.
So as we go through, and I know Dr. Roeder and Bill in your respective areas have gotten a lot of questions in the last couple of days. I'm going to start with you, Bill. One of the things that I've heard from parents is, my son or daughter lives in the residence halls. What's being told to them as this is going through the process?
We're encouraging students to pay attention at this point to ECU alerts, also to pay attention really to the things that all of us are watching, which is the TV, which is, this is a large story and it's on so many different channels in so many different ways, that when we're 5 or 6 days out, it just pays attention. You should just pay attention to what's going on. When we start getting closer and we start having official messaging go out, we have floor meetings, we put up signs in the halls, as well as we then have our own email distribution list to the students that we try to keep them up to date.
Dr. Roeder, for you, I'm sure a lot of the phone calls are mom and dad maybe from New Jersey or a long distance away, and they're worried because I can't get my hand on them to make sure they're safe.
Right.
A lot of that comes through your office for those questions and concerns. Right. What can you kind of say to parents that may be a long distance away that can kind of ease their mind that ECU is working with their students along through this?
And I'll say this as a former Yankee. I'm a Western New Yorker, and so I think this university prepares itself very well for these types of storms. We try to get ahead of it the best we can. We inform our students. There's alerts that go out. My office often has a phone call center, so we can kind of funnel all of those phone calls into our office so we can give parents and families the most updated information that we're receiving from the university, as well as students can call us. So the northern folks, you need to rest assured that we are doing everything we can to make sure that our students are safe. And if for some reason the storm would turn, you would know that. I think our communication is very good with parents, families, and our students.
So I'm going to go, we have a couple questions that are coming in. Please continue to put those into the comment section. The first one kind of came from Denise. I'm going to go to Lauren with this. Talk about how it's communicated to students if they're parked in areas that are flood zones or at risk. How do they find out about that?
Sure. So we have 2 main lots on campus that continuously flood, and we have signage in those lots that they do flood with heavy rainfall or flash flooding. So the lower College Hill parking lot, as well as the lower Minges parking lot, are constantly flooding, even when we just have a strong thunderstorm, not necessarily when we have tropical storms come through our area. So there is signage in those parking lots. Parking and Transportation also has an email list of all of their permit holders. And so anyone who are permit holders in those lots will receive an email telling them that the parking lots are closing. I believe they're actually closing tonight in anticipation that we might see some rain starting as early as Sunday. So they'll receive an email if they have a parking permit for those parking lots.
And Bill, a lot of that, I was gonna say, you wanna jump in there?
Yeah, the students affectionately, or not affectionately, refer to the lot that Lauren was just talking about as the flood lot. So at the end of today, when that lot is closed, you'll see that lot actually have barricades put across it to block it off if there are no vehicles in there. If there are vehicles in there, the police will take a look at their parking decals and we'll try to locate those students to get those moved out. So we just won't abandon someone in the efforts to close the lot.
Great question. Thank you, Denise, for that. We have another question. Dr. Roeder, this one will come your way, I think. Tracy is asking if a student decides on their own, the university hasn't closed, classes haven't been canceled, they decide to go home and they're going to miss class. Is their best protocol to contact their professors?
Yes, so every class, some classes do not have mandatory attendance, others do, but they allow the students to miss up to 3 to 5 classes a semester. And we always tell the students to use their best judgment. I would recommend that they email their professors to say that they're going home, and so they're aware. They can also contact our office, they can copy us on it, so we're also aware in case for some reason somebody reports them missing and then we're concerned, just so we know too. But I highly encourage students to always talk to their faculty when they're leaving the institution.
So that's one of the things that we've talked about as a collective leadership group is when people decide to go home. One that I know Janine and I have talked about is we're concerned about sending people home if they live in the western part of the state where now that's in the midst of the path.
Right.
So they have to think about that. But there's a difference between when classes are canceled and I miss a class
Right.
versus when I decide on my own.
Right, and so if classes were canceled, their attendance or work is not expected at all. If the students should choose to go home on their own, then that would be, they would have to have get an absent for that class. So they'd have to make up the work, they have to communicate with the faculty. The faculty, generally work with students regarding that. And it's very interesting because it's probably safer here than anybody going to the western part of the state to go home. So I would encourage students to work with their faculty. Only are you excused if the university should be closed.
So I want to kind of go through for each of you, starting with you, Bill. What in campus living has been some of the questions that you guys have gotten the most? And I'm going to go through it for everybody else, but what have you guys gotten in the residence halls?
Yeah. Some of the questions that we're getting are relative to, are we going to close and ask their child to leave? And at this point, the university is not deciding to make any decision to close for classes. And as such, our residence halls will stay open through this storm event. And we're prepared for that. The buildings that we build on our campus are 100-year construction type buildings. They are safer than any typical house would be to be in and ride out a storm. And so we have really no concerns from a safety standpoint for our students in remaining. We also get some questions about what happens with food service, what happens when the power goes out. We are prepared actually to feed all of our students and have food on hand that can last for 6 days. And a plan in place that should we lose power in the dining halls, we have an alternative source of being able to provide food.
So I want to jump in real quick before I go to Dr. Roeder. Again, continue to put your questions live in the comment section below. I'm going to come back to some of those frequently asked questions for each of you, but Kellyanne had a question, and we all, from our perspective, went through Matthew last year.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things, some of us were here when Floyd was here in '99. Kellyanne has a freshman, so this is her first run through with a freshman in college and having to deal with that. Can you kind of talk about, this storm doesn't seem to be the one that's going to cause any evacuation and going through that. What did we learn or take away from Matthew last year that has helped us get ready for this year?
I would say, and this would also, I was here during Floyd, I would say that what we learned is not necessarily the wind speed, it's really the aftermath, it's the amount of water that we have taken in, as we talked in the emergency weather meeting yesterday, we're very saturated, which Lauren talked about. And so water will rise quickly. And I think that, you know, you can look outside, it's sunny, and all of a sudden you hear, oh my, we're gonna have, you know, flooding. And if you're close to the Tar River, you're gonna have flooding. And so I think, and Floyd was the most significant, and we learned that we need to be prepared for those students who live closer to the river. Where would they go? That's why the call center is very helpful. Housing was very helpful last year with us. We worked together with Campus Living to get people temporary housing during that period of time. And so I think what we learned the most, and we've been fortunate with the winds, it's not so much the winds damage we sustain, it's more of water. And I always say water kind of rolls downhill, and if it's in the west, in Raleigh, and we've had dams break before, and so that's really the concern with the water. And the students, unfortunately, like to play in the water. I always encourage them not to, but that's probably the biggest concern.
Lauren, how about you from an environmental health and safety perspective? What takeaways are now being implemented or thought about this year?
Well, from Floyd into Matthew, there was a lot of lessons learned from Floyd, and a lot of mitigative actions were taken as far as areas that flood fairly easy. So we've added door dams and floodgates. We know areas to add sandbags, and so those areas have been reconstructed over the years so that those aren't necessarily a problem anymore. As far as lessons learned from Matthew, we're going to see this in the future with any tropical storm events that we have on campus. That it's a two-term event, a lot like Dr. Ritter was saying. You have the impacts of the hurricane, the heavy winds and rain, and then a week later you're going to have the second event of the flooding. So it might be beautiful, and yet we're still evacuating students. Fortunately for this event, I just want to break away for a second. We're not expecting any riverine flooding with 1 to 2 inches. We're not expecting that the Tar River will rise into flood stage. The river's actually very low right now, so that's good news for us and those along the Tar River. But other lessons learned from Matthew is our messaging, making sure that we're getting to students earlier, letting them know that we're monitoring the situation. We were more cautious with Matthew and giving them extra time away. So that kind of broke into fall break. Students were not on campus during the impact of Matthew, which was very fortunate for us. But it was, I'm not going to say harder to get in touch with students, but they weren't necessarily monitoring their emails. So we were doing a lot of texting during Matthew because they weren't here on campus for us to directly interact with them. And then going into the secondary event with the flooding, we worked incredibly close with the city and county, and we'll continue to do so, as well as the U.S. Geological Services folks have done a lot of mapping along the Tar River. So we're working with the city and county and identifying what we can do in the future to hopefully prevent flooding that we saw during Floyd and Matthew.
So for those of you watching, hang on, we're moving a little bit closer so that it makes it a little easier for you guys to hear. We want to make sure you can hear everything that our guests are talking about. So hang on for the camera movement just a minute. We're going to keep moving, but we want to make sure you can hear everybody. So as we go with that, Bill, one of the questions that just came in a few minutes ago was, I hear you saying that the residence halls are built for this type of stuff. They're probably among the safest places. Okay, now flip it to, I have a student that lives off campus. What should they be thinking about? Who should they be talking to in that process as they prepare?
If you have a student who lives off campus, the response has a lot to do with where your child is living. They need to make sure that where they're located and where they might be parking their car, should they have a car, is that one of the things they think about is their car safe where it's going to be parked, should there be localized flooding. The second thing that they want to think about is, are they in a ground floor kind of structure where they have to worry about maybe providing some sandbags for themselves by going to Lowe's and just buying some playground sand and protecting their front doors or areas where it might have some water intrusion. Please do not encourage them to tape their windows if they live off campus, because that provides no additional layer of safety, and in the end, most students never seem to take it down, and therefore it results in extra charges from the landlord on the back end of that process. The other things that they want to make sure is that they have some drinking water, should there be a problem with water and water purity in their area, depending on what level of flooding or problems that exist, and also have some food that they can eat that doesn't have to be cooked. So should their neighborhood go without power for a couple of days, that they're able to survive that way fairly well.
So, Lauren and Janine, you guys were all of us were in the weather meeting, but the discussions that are starting to come up now relate to classes. From your perspective right now, we're not looking at any impact for classes for any of the days next week, right?
With this western shift, most of North Carolina is not within that cone of impact. So we're looking at 1 to 2 inches of rainfall, 20-mile-an-hour winds. It's a little longer lasting than a typical pop-up thunderstorm, but it's just another day. We know that ECU stands for everyone carries umbrellas, so bring your umbrella on Monday. It'll be a normal day in Greenville.
And we actually, I think it was about a week ago, had a storm that
Yeah.
dropped about an
Yeah.
inch or two of rain. So for the moms and dads not here, that's not uncommon for our students to have these come through. Janine, you've been a part of this, and I'm kind of putting you on a spot to talk a little bit outside of your realm, but the communication piece of this, people want to know if they're going to make a decision on classes, how quickly would that be communicated? I know with Matthew, we were able to make a plan pretty early. Right now, there's not any communication plan to even discuss classes at this point, right?
Not that I know of. When we left the weather meeting yesterday, it was my understanding that we're business as usual unless they call me at 5 a.m. and tell me otherwise. But yeah, I mean, based on what Lauren continues to send us updates, like she said, the western part of the state is gonna feel more of this hurricane than we will.
Right. And granted, we get a lot of questions sometimes when a dark cloud goes over from students
Right.
wanting to cancel classes. So we get that, we understand.
I would be surprised even if we're going to lose power through this, which is one of the things that disrupts lives for people. All of our utilities on campus are basically underground, so we're relatively protected in ways that typical neighborhoods aren't with overhead power lines. And so while I think we're prepared should we lose power as a campus during the storm, I would not even expect that to happen this go around.
And I think it's also important to let families know that we will be monitoring the weather throughout the weekend, even though 5 o'clock Friday, things kind of slow down. The weather experts, the news experts, we will be watching the weather. So in case for some reason it does take a shift or whatever, we will all be in a virtual meeting to decide what we need to make, if there any decisions need to be made. So rest assured, we will watch the storm as it approaches the coast.
And again, checking the homepage.
Yep.
Go to ecu.edu, that
Yep.
homepage, as Janine said, the red bar at the top. As things get updated, that'll be the place for it. Bill, did you?
Yeah. Well, the question before was about what about off-campus impacts? There still are some things your student can do as you look at living on campus. And many of our buildings have window air conditioning units. And when you have a 20-mile-an-hour wind and rain, the rain does not come down, it comes sideways. And so they should expect maybe to have some small leaks come in around the air conditioning units if they have one. They need to make sure that they've closed their windows and locked them so that they're sealed as tight as they can be. And I would recommend that you suggest to your student to move things off the floor that they might have close to the windows in case there's any intrusion at all so that there aren't any problems that they might experience.
And then I would imagine after this passes, communication to, if you're on campus, to your RAs or to whoever that you have some, they need to make sure that they're telling folks that.
That's correct.
So Lauren, coming back to you, so we hear Irma's going a little bit west, impacts may not be as much. I got a feeling you got an eye on another storm behind that with Jose.
Right.
Right now, it's way out there.
Mm-hmm.
Give us a little bit of a perspective on what you know about that storm, because if that passes by, people are going to start watching Jose.
Right. Yeah. So Jose has developed into a hurricane, as Chris has mentioned. Right now, most models are keeping it offshore. There have been a few scenarios where it could kind of loop around and possibly impact southern Florida again, which we're really hoping that doesn't happen for our friends down in Florida. But for the majority, most models are keeping it offshore. It should turn north and kind of shoot in between the U.S. and Bermuda, keeping it hundreds of miles off the coast of eastern North Carolina. But unfortunately, the areas such as Barbuda and the Lesser Antilles down there do look like they may be impacted again, which is incredibly unfortunate. But we are keeping our eyes on Jose in case it does decide to come further west and impact eastern North Carolina.
So we're going to keep answering questions for about another 5 or 10 minutes. So if you have questions that you want to ask us, go ahead into the comments box. A lot of you are putting very positive comments saying that your experience with ECU has been great. Shauna said that she believes that ECU is going to do whatever's in the best interest of our kids. We appreciate those comments for sure. We don't always get to hear those, so it's nice to hear those. But as we go back to kind of the questions, Lynn, talk a little bit about the questions Dean of Students Office has been getting the last couple of days and anything you can fill in.
Right. I think a lot of our calls have been from families from the north. And as a former Yankee, or I guess I'm still a Yankee, take a blizzard any day. But a hurricane, you don't know. I mean, you can prepare. You know a snowstorm is coming, but a hurricane, it's the unknown. And so I think a lot of them were just trying to be reassured that we kind of were watching it, and I think also a lot of the images we've seen from Houston. I mean, this is a powerful storm that's coming that will hit the coast of Florida or southern Florida minimally, and so I think that frightens people. The unknown is very frightening, and I think when you have questions, I mean, there's a lot of information on ECU. If you look under the alert. We also started up the call center trying to help people just to kind of calm nerves. And so they were basically asking, like, what are we doing? And I can tell you, after being here 25 years, we've been through this. I think we do a great job. We learn every time as we experience a storm, and I think we continue to be better prepared. And so I think just reassuring them, and what about if classes are canceled, would they get excused and things like that. So a lot of them were more from folks that aren't so familiar with hurricanes, and we just tried to reassure them that we've got a plan and try to explain what so many of the things we're talking about today.
So this is a question that, and I'll go to you, Bill, because it's campus living related, that came in, probably not for this storm, but say we get to one similar to Matthew where we're suggesting people leave campus. If somebody's too far away or doesn't have a vehicle, would they normally be able to just stay on campus?
Even in those moments, like with Matthew, we kept the residence halls open, and students who didn't have a place to go or didn't want to leave were able to stay on campus during that time. And the universal feedback from them initially was they were grateful, and by day 3 they were unbelievably bored because they were staying here with nothing to do. But we're prepared actually to have all 5,800 students who live on campus stay with us for a 5 or 6 day event. From a food standpoint, from our ability to manage and deal with all the activity associated with that.
Janine, communication-wise, I think in the last couple of years, Matthew, we had the benefit of it, but social media has become a big part of any crisis situation on all campuses everywhere else. Talk about how you guys have really built a commitment to social media and how you rely on it in these times like this.
Right. Well, like Lynn, I was working here at Floyd, and where we literally were faxing news releases, and then the power went out, and so we were driving releases to the news stations if we could get them there, and so people had to rely on TV. And today, like I mentioned, ECU Alert is really 7 layers, and one of those is when we put out an alert, we can put it out on ECU Alert Twitter, and then our main ECU Twitter account almost automatically retweets that. We can put it on Facebook, but usually we put most of those on Twitter just because it's so much faster. And plus, that's where our students are. That's what we've learned, that's where the students are. They want to get a text, and they want to see it on Twitter, but we also send emails because sometimes your cell phone's not charged, so you're not going to see it. So that's why we have the multiple layers. We even have speakers on campus, so if it's really bad, the voice of God starts talking above and tells everybody to go inside. So, and we test that usually twice a year.
So, Lauren, with that, sometimes we also have such great communication that people take advantage of it, and there's a lot of misinformation that ends out there. Talk about some of those places where people should go if they want to know tap dead that, well, this is what ECU is working on. Where do they need to get that one source or two from?
That's a great question, especially with Irma. Unlike any other storm, there's been a lot of fake news out there as far as Category 6s, doomsday forecast, it's going to Texas. So there's a lot of folks who are enthusiastic, weather enthusiasts. So you really want to go to official news sources. So follow the ECU official account, follow the ECU Weather STEM Twitter account. National Hurricane Center in Morehead City is our local weather service. The National Hurricane Center is the best place for any hurricane or tropical storm information. Also our local news media, WITN, WNCT, and WCTI have great updates. The national news media is looking at more of the big picture, the larger impacts. They are showing the death and destruction, where we're not anticipating that. We are not getting the Cat 5. So if you tune into our local media folks, they're telling you what's going to be happening here in Eastern North Carolina. They're not hyping up the situation. They're keeping just the facts. And so even our parents, if you are out of state, we do encourage that you follow them on social media, and you can live stream their news reports as well for the most accurate and current information for our area.
So one of the things that I think that's really important is that people make sure that they trust the information. They understand it. Some of the questions we're getting here is, if you get a crisis situation or a power outage, will those things work? Will the loudspeaker still work if we don't have power? Well, I know for the website, if we get to that point, we can actually take a lot of the big pieces off and make it kind of a light web page so that it serves those emergency pieces. So those are things, Lauren, from your side, you've worked with colleagues across the system, and those kind of backup plans are in place too.
Right. So as Janine has mentioned, the ECU alert system is multi-layered. And that's so if you're not getting it one way, we can use another way to communicate with you. So if we don't have power and you can't check your email, if your cell phone's dead and you can't check your text messages, we've got the outdoor speakers. We've got phones in offices, indoor speakers in our residence halls. We've got generators on, or at least our residence halls on campus. We're able to send those alerts in multiple ways so that we don't have to have power. We have continuity plans on campus so that we can continue our operations when we are being impacted by any utility outage on campus. So I would say that we are prepared and we have redundant plans for sending out communications.
So as we get ready to wrap up, I want to offer our panelists any closing thoughts that you want to share with parents and families that are wrapping up.
Just a few random thoughts in some ways. Lauren mentioned the generators in the residence halls. We do have generators in the residence hall, and they're there to provide continuity of life safety as well as emergency lighting through a situation like this. So we will not, when the generators kick on, have full electrical service for students in their rooms. And so please don't share that with them or so that students think that. The second is, when you think about how we pre-plan something as simple as this bottle of water, we just acquired 53,000 bottles of these in advance of the storm in case we would need them. So it's one of the indicators of how we try to look ahead and plan for the worst and hope that it never happens.
Right.
Dr. Irma?
And I would say the same thing. We live in the South, we live along the coast, and so we're always cognizant of that we may have a storm. And we've had a couple of years where we haven't had any, but that doesn't mean that we let our guard down. And so if you have concerns in that, please look at ECU Alert, go on the homepage. You signed up for the alerts during orientation. That's very helpful. No, your students will probably get it before you. But that's the way we try to best communicate with everyone. For example, on the weekends, you're not going to get a voice. You're not going to have somebody in an office. However, you can look at some of the ways we've communicated the storm, and if for some reason something changes, you'll know about it.
So I'm going to give a brief overview of the impacts again for Eastern North Carolina. We're expecting 1 to 2 inches of rainfall, wind sustained at about 20 mile an hour, wind gust up to 30 mile an hour. Impacts starting as early as Sunday night, lasting through Monday night. So it will be a short time period, just about 24-hour time period that will be impacted. Go ahead and have your student prepare those hurricane kits, get the water and food that they may need. Even if we're not impacted by Irma or Jose, we still have two and a half months left of the hurricane season. The Atlantic Basin's proven to be very active this season. We can expect that this won't be our last tropical storm of the season. So go ahead and get prepared. It doesn't hurt. You may also need this later during the winter weather season as we get into this winter. So go ahead and prepare. Get your food and supplies, all that fun stuff. And you can find more information at ecu.edu/alert.
Janine?
I would just say, if you're a parent watching this, tell your student do their homework over the weekend, because as far as we know, they're going to have class on Monday.
That's right.
But if that plan changes, they will get an alert.
That's right.
So, and I'm going to slide in here kind of as we start to wrap up. Don't expect classes to get canceled. If you decide to have your son or daughter come home, or they decide on their own, They're not going to be excused absences. They're going to have to make up the work. They're going to have to touch base with their faculty members to make sure that they understand that they're gone. So it's very different than if the university cancels classes or if we close the university. This is not that situation at this point in time. I want to thank our panel for making time on a Friday. We hope that this has helped answer some of your questions. We don't want to by any means dismiss your concerns. They are completely valid, especially those of you a long distance away. We fully get why you're concerned. If we've not answered your questions, please continue to reach out. That's why we're here. A parent apologized for continually reaching out, and I told her don't worry about it. That's why we're here. That's our job. Our job is to make sure that your students are safe. So thank you again to our panel, and I hope you've enjoyed this information session.